And just give me a moment to clean up a couple of things on my screen here. Make sure I have what I'm trying to do right. Okay. Mhm. Aha. Okay. All right. Well, so we're passing through an interesting moment in history. But first, let me offer my obeisances to the assembled devotees. Vanchakava Tarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha, Patitanam Pavanabhyo, Vaishnavim Namo Namaha. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukam Karti Vachalam Pangam Langayate Girim Yat Kripatamaham Bande Paramananda Madhavam. So we try to say something by the grace of you all, but in preparing this morning's talk, I like to think about things that Srila Guru Maharaj says. And we're living through an especially interesting historical time. Last week, when we gave our talk, it was Easter Sunday, which is a big day on the calendar here in Mexico, because I don't know, something like 95% of the population here is Catholic. I suppose it's like that in Ireland as well. Uh, and so the big news was the fallecimiento, as we say in Spanish, the disappearance of the Catholic Pope Francisco. It's an odd word, disappearance, because here in Mexico we have a problem with people who are being disappeared forcibly. So, but fallecimiento is a good word. Uh, it means he's left us. He's no longer here. And so after much to do about his funeral, now it falls to the Curia, or the College of Cardinals, to select a successor. And insofar as our book under discussion, Sri Guru and His Grace, touches on this problem, the succession, what happens when Gurudev disappears? I thought that our reading today would be particularly relevant insofar as it talks about what happens when Gurudev is no longer with us. This chapter says the disappearance of the Guru. After the disappearance of the spiritual master, how should the disciples continue the mission? So this is something that the Catholic Church will be preoccupied with over the coming weeks and months. And it's interesting if you look at how that's being dealt with. Some say, well, Francisco in particular, he was a reformer. He differed from the anterior pontiff in terms of John Paul being, in a way, a very conservative but charismatic figure. And his successor, Benedict, was really the theologian behind John Paul, who determined his policies. But Francisco is seen as a departure from that. So, knowing that he's older than 80 years old, of course, he worked to construct a system that would continue his heritage, if you like. But it's problematic. They say about 80% of the cardinals and the College of Cardinals were handpicked by him. But then again, it's been pointed out, they didn't all share his point of view. He picked those candidates he felt were the worthiest of succeeding him. And some of those, while they were of sturdy character, let's say, uh, they followed the principles, let's say. But they didn't necessarily share his point of view. And so it will be interesting to see how that plays out, how the College of Cardinals responds. Will they elect someone who is uh, very close in mind to Pope Francisco, or will they go along national lines? For example, the Catholic Church is centered in Italy. Well, they might well pick an Italian, or it may be that they're following a more conservative line than was thought of and represented by Francisco. And they might pick someone who's entirely contrary, or they might find someone who's really exactly in the same line of thought, but who turns out to have skeletons in the closet or a dark past. There's an interesting book on this by Robert Harris called um, Conclave. They made it into a Netflix film. It's a little slow, but you can see how these issues are played with and explored uh, in a manner that's quite relevant. So my point is the the succession of the guru it's not an easy thing. The succession of a great spiritual master is not an easy thing. Um, I was trying to find a parallel, and I often find parallels in music for these things, but I find lots of my spiritual godbrothers are not so interested in music, so they don't understand the parallels. Uh, so I thought I'd come up with one from history. And I thought of Marcus Aurelius among the different Caesars and Roman emperors. Marcus Aurelius he's the philosopher king. He wrote a book called Meditations, which you can read today and improve your life by reading. It represents the Stoic philosophy, but there's a lot of Stoicism in the Bhagavad Gita, or rather, perhaps the Greeks borrowed from the ancient Hindu masterpiece, the Bhagavad Gita, incorporated that into their philosophy, and that was copied later by the Romans, especially Cicero and Marcus Aurelius, who stands out as being such a great emperor, leader of men, and thinker. And his meditations are well worth reading. And yet, when it came to the succession, Marcus Aurelius was very careful in that he found someone who was very close to him. And in those days, the Roman Republic was uh, a memory. Uh, they had already become an imperium, an empire with an emperor. And the idea of succession was, well, it should fall to the son. But Marcus Aurelius was very careful to train his son, even though he was very young, and taught him his principles and took him along with him to the different wars in Germany and uh, places where the barbarians ruled. Uh, this is actually, you can see a movie called Gladiator. And at the beginning of the movie, the Roman emperor who's represented there is supposed to be Marcus Aurelius. Well, his son was Commodus. And as it turns out, when Marcus Aurelius passed away and passed the kingdom to Commodus, he was a young man. He was something like 19 years old. And it turned out that he was a bit of an airhead. And he didn't really have the capacity to rule. And then there was a plot against his life. And after that, he changed and he became extremely cruel and violent and killed senators and he killed the political opposition. He did everything he could to destroy the political opposition of the day. And then he reinvented himself as a gladiator, which most people frowned on because they found that a philosopher king shouldn't become an entertainer in a spectator sport. It was degrading. But he had a system where he would fight other gladiators. He would give them a lead sword or a wooden sword. And he, of course, would fight with the finest steel and armor. Or he would arrange elephants in the Colosseum in such a way that they were in cages. He would walk on a catwalk above the cages armed with spears and arrows, and in this way kill many rhinoceros and elephants and even lions. And the people cheered him on and thought he was brilliant. One of the things that he did that comes to mind because I live in a small town, San Miguel, and every time when I walk to work, I walk past this art museum, and in front of the art museum, there's a giant bronze bull. And I think of Commodus because he once called an engineer to him and he said, I need you to create a giant bronze bull big enough that a man can fit inside. Well, the engineer goes about creating the sculpture. And he says, but I want you to insert a system of trumpets and so that a man can play the trumpet while he's inside the bull. And so the engineer went about his business and created this giant bull. And then Commodus said, I'd like you to get inside the bull now, just to show me how it works. Can you play the trumpet? And the engineer, he's being paid in gold, so he climbs inside the brass bull. And Commodus closes the door and locks it. And then he has his men build a little fire underneath the bull so that he can roast the engineer, because the whole thing was a plot to get revenge on him. And then the man, as he's being suffocated by the smoke and burned inside the bull, begins tooting the horn to the pleasure of Commodus and his friends who would drink wine and eat fatted hogs. So this is the kind of successor that Marcus Aurelius wound up with. It wasn't at all what he had planned. And so we can impute that to the lack of foresight on the part of Marcus Aurelius and say, well, yeah, he was a philosopher king, but he wasn't so smart. Look at who he picked for his successor. Or we can just say that Krishna moves in a crooked way. How things play out in the real world are not always exactly what we had planned. The man that represents himself as a great friend of the people seems to be a wise and great leader before he's elected. And then after being elected, we find quite the opposite, that there's an amazing amount of corruption and so on. So who's to blame? It's an interesting question, the succession. How does it come about? So Srila Sri Ramar says, anything may come. Well, let me go back a little bit. The student asks, after the disappearance of the spiritual master, how should the disciples continue his mission? And Srila Sri Ramar says, you must not neglect your conscience. You may go to fight as a soldier to save your country or your people or your honor. Your environment does not depend on your whim. It may appear extremely perplexing, but you will have to face that. However complex the battlefield may be, as a soldier, you will have to fight. Otherwise, you have no faith in your own cause. There may be disturbances. Rather, we say there should be. There may even be fighting amongst devotees, but we should not leave the preaching of Mahaprabhu despite all differences. Disturbance must come because our most beloved Guru has withdrawn from amongst us. Such a great curse has been thrown on our heads. Should we like to live peacefully? In its wake, disturbances must come, and we must undergo them. Still, we must remain sincere. We must face the difficulty in a proper way. It has come to train us to go in the right direction. So I read this last week. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to where Srila Sri Ramakrishna begins to discuss Judas. And this is an interesting digression, if you like, but he's discussing here a few different things. One is the relationship with the guru and the disciple, and the other is also something about the succession. So if we skip ahead here, Jesus and Judas, Srila Sri Ramakrishna said, even Christ told his followers, one of you will betray me. Judas was amongst the 12. So Jesus said, amongst the 12 of you, there is one who will hand me over to the enemy this very night. Even this may be possible. And this always bothered me. I had a Catholic upbringing. It always bothered me, the idea that Judas is a disciple. He's an apostle. I don't know if he's an apostle, but he's a disciple of Christ. He sits with Christ at the Last Supper. How is it possible? I don't get it. He's synonymous with traitor. Judas is the worst traitor who ever walked the earth. So how is it that he's a disciple of Jesus? How can you reconcile that? So Christ told his followers, one of you will betray me. Amongst the 12 of you, there is one who will hand me over to the enemy this very night. He said, even Peter, you will also deny me thrice before the cock crows. Oh, no, 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 I can't deny you. But no pride of a devotee does the Lord tolerate. He wants surrender, complete surrender. No, no, Peter said, I am your faithful servant. That kind of ego must not stand. Peter, who was also the leader, was also exposed. So no pride is tolerated by the Lord. So if you look at the Catholic Church, they base their disciplic succession on Peter. Peter is the rock on which the church was founded. But here Christ himself tells him, even you will also deny me 3 times before the cock crows. He says, oh, no, no, that won't happen. But later, when he's accosted by the Romans, and the Romans ask him, do you know this Jesus Christ? Then Peter says, oh, no, no, I don't know who he is. And I thought I'd dilate a little bit about this prime disciple of Jesus Christ, Judas, just to see how he's been treated by history. After all, he's also supposed to be a disciple of Jesus. So what if Judas had his own disciplic succession? Then again, just another question here, and that is, Jesus Christ is supposed to be so merciful that he forgives everyone's sins. But what of Judas? Is the mercy of Christ so magnanimous that it extends to all except for the fallen disciple who betrayed him? What about Judas? Does Christ forgive him? The name of Judas is synonymous with that of traitor in many languages. Dante fixes him in the deepest circle of hell, along with Brutus and Cassius, who betrayed Caesar. According to Dante's version, Satan is this giant demon, and he's frozen in ice in the ninth circle, the deepest center of hell. And Satan has three faces and a pair of bat-like wings affixed under each chin. And as he beats his wings, he creates a cold wind, which freezes the ice around him and the other sinners in the ninth circle. And the winds he creates are felt throughout the other circles of hell, but with each of his three mouths, he's chewing on Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. So once upon a time when I was in Navadvip Dham, sitting at the feet of His Divine Grace Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami, he commented further on the position of Judas. He said, "Do you know about Judas and the Christian teachings?" This is a transcript from the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat. He says, when Jesus was praying in the garden before his crucifixion, Judas approached him with scribes and priests in order to betray him, identifying that Messiah with a kiss. Suddenly, Jesus cast his glance toward Judas in such an impressive way. He penetrated Judas, and Judas thought to himself, I'm caught. I shall be responsible for Jesus Christ's demise. But still, Jesus' vision to me was something more like, I'm exploiting you, Judas. It is not that you are exploiting me, rather I am utilizing you as a traitor to show the greatness of my life to the future world. Jesus had already said at the Last Supper, amongst these 12 disciples, one will betray me. He knew. Judas had been there then, and Jesus had cast his glance toward Judas. Then later, when Judas came with the soldiers and the scribes to the Garden of Gethsemane to capture him, Jesus had cast his glance toward Judas once again and was thinking, you think you're exploiting me for some money, but I am exploiting you for eternity. You have to stand out as a sinful person against me. I knew you were a traitor, but I did not disclose you. I still took you within my group of followers, knowing full well that I'm exploiting you. The look of Jesus was like that. Judas was crazed. He threw away the sack of silver. He ran to the authorities and said, I've committed the worst sin. I cannot tolerate it. Judas's energy was drunk. His spirit was drawn. Just like in jiu-jitsu, when someone attacks the opposition with great force, but the opposition suddenly withdraws, causing the attacking person to fall on their face. Judas found himself in that sort of position. Jesus was exchanging love for betrayal. It was the sort of love that disarmed and sent Judas mad. I treated him so wickedly. Yet his look is not one of vindictiveness, but of infinite gratitude. That sort of look Jesus cast upon me. In the perfect vision, in the full-fledged consideration, every atom is helping the pastimes of Krishna, whether it is direct or indirect. And although it seems to be indirect at present, the deeper vision will reveal that it comes towards direct service. So, in a sense, Judas is the greatest disciple since he's risking hell for the greater glory of the Savior while denying salvation for himself. Everyone else gets salvation, but not Judas. Judas has to go to hell. So accepting hell in exchange for your service, can you contemplate that? Srila Sri Damar said, uh, there's no risk, no gain. You understand? Unless I give something, I won't get anything. And then there's, uh, greater risk, greater gain. The greater the risk, the greater the gain. But what about all risk, no gain? He says in terms of surrender, that's really the higher position. So Jagai and Madai are also like that. Srila Sri Ramakrishna continues. He says, enhancing the beauty of the conduct of their Lord. Sacrifice, playing the part of the negative side, great sacrifice. Forever they're giving away their own fame to make their Lord glorious forever. Their contribution. So in this sense, we we think sometimes that Nityananda Prabhu is even more merciful than Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because Jesus, he could not forgive Judas. The Christians do not forgive Judas. He's in hell as far as they're concerned. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu could not forgive Jagai and Madai because they attacked Nityananda, his great devotee. But Nityananda Prabhu, he shows greater mercy. He forgives Jagai and Madai, exalts them to the position of saints and rewards them with Krishna praise. So great rogues were delivered. That sort of part played by Jagai and Madai. So we're the most notorious figures, and we were absolved by Gaur Nityananda. So in the same way, we Western devotees were the most notorious figures. We're the most sinful and the most fallen. So obviously, we need to get the greatest mercy. A great sacrifice, eternal sacrifice of the eternal fame. Jagai and Mara wanted to hit Nityananda with some earthen pot. Gaura Haribo, Gaura Haribo. So if we can look so deep, then all negative indirect service becomes direct, comes to direct service. The depth of our vision can detect as much as depth of our sight. We can feel and see so much direct service, even from the indirect section. Maya is also rendering service. Satan is also rendering service to God by revolting. Without darkness, light cannot be perceived. To play the part of darkness, that is sacrifice to show the greatest of light. Satan is making God great. His contribution is apparently negative. One may think that Satan's contribution makes God magnanimous, generous, goodness. If Satan did not exist, how could we understand the goodness of God, the greatness of God? Hare Krishna. The contribution towards service apparently indirect way, but by spacious sight, it comes within direct service. So wholesale everywhere, there is the grace of God, even in Satan. So this is Srila Sridhar Maharaj discussing how to harmonize uh, the darkest characters in history. Uh, Somehow they're involved in the sweet play of the divine absolute. Somehow they're contributing to that. So therefore, every wave is favorable, even the dark waves. This is congruent with Srila Sridhar Maharaj's thinking. And it's a special gift because not everyone thinks like that, as we were saying before, in disciplic succession or in the devotees who follow other devotees. Uh, Govinda Maharaj, I was reading the other day, said, you can't offend the devotees. You have to be very careful about speaking out against other devotees because you don't know what their position is. You don't know if their position is 100%, 80%, 35%, 10%. Time will tell, perhaps, you know. Perhaps someone will be celebrated 50 years from now, 100 years from now as the great uh, acharya or even follower in the line. But you look at that person today and you think, oh no, they're Judas. They did this and they did that. Uh, Judas sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Sometimes I think, how did that go? He went home and he said, hi, honey, I'm home. Look what I got. And his wife says, oh, yeah, what's that? What do you have there, honey? And Judas says, I got 30 pieces of silver. Look at this. And he pours the silver out on the table, and his wife goes, oh, that's great. That's wonderful. How did you do that? You're so smart. I'm so impressed. But did you do something bad? And Judas says, I don't know, no, not really. What did you do? I sold Jesus. You sold Jesus Christ for 30 pieces of silver? Are you out of your mind? Go back there and give them the money back. What a terrible thing to do. But at the time, I suppose he thought it was a good idea. I've known devotees who I was very close to and who I loved greatly and had spiritual, transcendental adventures with, who wound up, selling a temple, selling the deities, selling the devotees. So were they Judas? I'm not sure. Look at what Srila Sridhar says about Judas. He seems to vindicate uh, him. So we don't know. There's a disciple in the pastimes of Srila Nityananda Prabhu named Abhiram Thakur. And he had a whip. Apparently, in his previous life, he was one of the cowherd boys. And whoever he hit with his whip would immediately experience Krishna prem. But then again, if we see a devotee who goes out and buys a bullwhip and starts whipping the devotees in the temple, you have to think, no, this is not it. This is not what I signed up for. So there's a fascinating dynamic between looking out for your own Hare Krishna spiritual self-interest and seeing to it that the people you associate with are worthy of your surrender. And at the same time, coming to the conclusion that I can't go on with this kind of association. I need to seek out some other association. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj's discourse is always, it always hews to the Hegelian dialectic of presenting something over here and then showing a different aspect of that and then coming to a higher conclusion. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj, personally, I think, he sees that as emblematic of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's own version of Vedanta, which is Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva. So he says in his pranam mantra to Govinda Maharaj, Achintya Chinta Samasta Veda Nipunam. He says that Govinda Maharaj is Nipuna, he's expert in the Chintya Veda, the known or understood or thought of Veda, and the Veda which is not understood, not known, and not thought of. So Srila Sridhar Maharaj is always, um, as a great guru of gurus, he's allowing for how to harmonize different points of view. He did not like, for example, that the devotees of ISKCON would come to him and criticize everything. He would try to show them, well, you should try to harmonize this in this light. But then again, he represented a very pure line. And now we look at the disciplic succession, and you have to think, well, how pure is pure? You know, can you drink water from the faucet? I do. I grew up in the 60s. We used to drink water from the hose. We'd be playing outside and we get thirsty and just turn on or stick our head under the spigot and turn whatever the water came out, we would be drinking that. Now people need, you know, triple filtered, I forget what they call that, osmosis, right? Triple filtered through osmosis and evaporation, super distilled pure water from a stainless steel container. And the steel has to be untouched by any human hands before it came to you. Or what level of purity do you look for in your water? I remember I used to preach in East Berlin. And in East Berlin, uh, this was before the wall came down. Just during that time when the wall was coming down, I was allowed to go through and preach to the devotees in East Berlin. And they apologized because the quality of the butter that they had was not very good. Irish butter is well known as being the best butter in the world because the Irish cows are fat and happy and they eat the best green grass. So I'm told. You know. And it was my experience there when I was with uh, Sivasani Meenakshi Sundaram and Advai and Pranashish Prabhu, that especially the ghee over at Suvasini's house was a special purity. But the butter that they had in East Berlin at that time was not very good. It was low quality. So they would cross over into West Berlin and try to buy butter over there. Or in India, sometimes you would get, I don't know if you've had this experience, you probably had, you'd get buffalo butter or buffalo milk. Sometimes in the Mat, they couldn't afford the really good milk, so they would serve buffalo milk. And buffalo milk is odd because I'm told buffaloes don't have efficient sweat pores in their skin or very low quality. So their urine comes out in the milk and it has a off flavor. So you have to think about, well, what kind of purity am I willing to put up with? What's my connection with divinity? Do I want buffalo butter, East German butter, you know, good Irish butter, Shivashini's excellent purified ghee? You know, where am I getting my nourishment? And we may find that the important thing might be to find someone who's more spiritually advanced than you are, as far as you can understand what spiritual advancement is, and follow that person until they come in connection with someone who's more spiritually advanced than them. That's how I came upon Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Govinda Maharaj. But in their absence, I'm not really sure where to turn. I think that in the association of devotees, somehow something comes out. But I think it's a very tricky kind of a problem just to turn around and say, oh, now so and so is on the scene and we're all going to fall down and worship him. And as I said at the beginning of this talk, that would be the problem for the Catholics now. I remember when John Paul passed away, and then there was Benedict, and then there was Francisco, and I was sitting with a Mexican woman and some friends. Somehow the conversation turned to Rome and the Catholic Church, and she said, well, I can't think of any other pope besides John Paul. And I was thinking, well, wow, I remember there was Pope Pius, I think, and then Pope Paul the Sixth, and then there was a John Paul who died very quickly. Oh, and there was Pope John the 23rd. My mother gave me a cross that was blessed by Pope John the 23rd. Kind of a happy Italian pope, very jolly. He presided over the Second Vatican Council, where they said it was okay to sing "Blowing in the Wind," with a guitar in the church. He was very liberal. Now there's someone else, and this woman was, well, I can only think of one. So some of us will be like that. We could only think of one person in our life who could give us spiritual joy. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj is willing to extend his vision. He used to say, I sometimes I think that Srila Govinda Maharaj is so much more qualified than I am, because after all, I was born in a family of Smarta Brahmanas. Srila Sridhar Maharaj came to, of course, the biographer will always say, well, this was his pastime. He was always divine. He's Nitya Lila Pravishta. But, in his pastime, he will come around and say, well, once I was in school and I had a friend, and when he spoke of his father, he would say, that man, blah, 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 and that man. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj was shocked and horrified and said, well, how can you speak of your father as that man? And his friend turned to him and he said, well, he hasn't always been my father. In my last life, I had a different father. In my life before that, in my next life, there'll be a different one. So I'm just passing through. And that impressed Srila Sridhar Maharaj. He wanted to go deeper. And he visited different speakers and thinkers and gurus and met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And he thought, okay, here I am. And Srila Govinda Maharaj himself, he said, when I was a young man, I wasn't really interested in any of this. He was a natural born Vaishnava. But we sometimes see natural born Vaishnavas who get interested in a different flow. And again, we take it as Govinda Maharaj's pastime. Of course, he was always Nitya Lila Pravishta, and it's his pastime to say this. But then again, why not take what he says? If the guru is supposed to be taken seriously, why not take it seriously when he says, I wasn't interested in this at all, but Srila Sridhar Maharaj was like a magnet to me. He drew me in. I was hypnotized. So that's my talk on. I have more about Judas, but I don't want to bore everyone. Because I used to work in the capacity of creating these books, which by the grace of God have managed to survive 40 years. People still read them and find something interesting in them. But see, I would do research because I didn't want Srila Sridhar Maharaj to be published in such a way that it appears that he's misspeaking. So if he says that, for example, the Romans, guided by Judas, came to Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, I had to check that and see, was that true? Was it the Garden of Gethsemane or was it another place? And I think like that. And in this way, Srila Guru Maharaj, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, people will ask me, well, who's really your teacher? Is it Srila Prabhupada or Srila Sridhar Maharaj? And I can't really favor one over the other in the sense that I would know nothing about Krishna without Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami. But then again, the person who taught me how to think and how to think about God, really, how to think about Krishna, how to understand the scriptures in the face of so many things that so many people say. Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So I think that's perhaps because I have some similar character. Everyone wanted to be Srila Prabhupada. Everybody tried to imitate his walk, his talk, how he preached, everything. But in terms of my own personal life and behavior, I find myself more aligned with Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So I have this tendency to read and look into things and research what Srila Sridhar Maharaj said, not with an eye towards certainty, because certainty is an enemy of faith, but with an eye towards being able to represent to any challenger that what Srila Sridhar Maharaj is saying is very well thought out. It's very solid theology, if you like. In the West, it's strange because the word theology only applies to Christianity and Judaism a little bit, and now we're going to let the Muslims in because they're also Abrahamic, and they're kind of the book, and they respect Christians a little bit, and the Jews a little bit, but Hinduism is beyond the pale. It's not theology. It's something entirely distinct. So if we talk about Judas and say something favorable, perhaps, then that's absolute heresy. But it's heresy to the Catholics or it's heresy to the Christians. But it's not necessarily heresy to a very deep thinking Hegelian Vaishnava. But to back his thesis about Judas, I found this essay by Jorge Luis Borges. It's called Tres Versiones de Judas. And I don't have time to read it, but his conclusions are interesting because here's an Argentinian man writing in Spanish in the 1940s who has conclusions very similar to those of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And I can't say, I really don't believe that Srila Sridhar Maharaj was exposed to Jorge Luis Borges unless he heard it on the radio or something. But this is a conclusion that he would have come to on his own, that without the service done by Judas to betray Christ, there's no resurrection, there's no crucifixion. And so he's offering the best service. All his other disciples, what did they do? Well, they founded a church and, they had some followers over there. But without Judas going to hell, you don't get to heaven. That's an interesting point of view. You can find more on that if you're interested in the subject. And very nice essay in Spanish. It's collected in a book called Aleph by Jorge Luis Borges. It's called Las Tres Versiones de Judas. So that's my Sunday talk, ladies and gentlemen. Any questions? Hare Krishna. I hope some of this is doing somebody some good somewhere. And if I could say that in Sanskrit, it would really sound good. Hare Krishna. Well, it's good to see all of you,
Thank you, Mahayogi. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna and Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai and Gaura Hari Bol. And next week,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Jai
Jai.
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 Jai Mahayogi Ki Jai.
Jai. Jai.
Jai.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. All right.
Yes.
God willing, we'll see you next week.
Ki Jai.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Jai.
God willing, we'll see you all next week, and pray for my soul. All right, and I'll pray for yours. Hare Krishna. Bye bye.
Krishna.
Dandavad, Maharaj. Dandavad, all the devotees. Thank you.